Well, as we send our kids off to kids' church, they're reminded of family. We draw together because we are family. We share a common Heavenly Father, and that does give family privileges. We refer to each other, not all the time, but there's an understanding underneath that we are family, and that family, we have a family of churches, and in that family of churches, we work together, we recognize each other, and we speak to each other like we know each other, and that gives us the ability also to identify some of us as brothers and sisters. And so today we have the privilege of being joined by someone from one of the family of our churches who we can call one of our sisters, or sister. Today we have joining with us Leonore Lopes from Unionville Alliance Church. When I'm here, you just sit silent, but when she comes, would you please greet her warmly? Now.
Thank you so much. Good morning, Into One Church. Good morning, and good morning to those of you who are online and those who may watch during the week. I must tell you, first of all, that it is a great honor and privilege to be here. I remember back in October when our lead pastor at Unionville, Pastor Daniel, kind of strongly encouraged me to come. And at that time, I thought I was just going to come and share a story, and I thought 10 minutes, no problem. And then when I spoke to your pastor, he says, oh, you have 30, 40 minutes. And I thought, oh my. But I understand that you are talking this week about the outflow of your life, and specifically the outflow of missions. And as I prayed and prepared about this message, I thought I would like to talk to you about infinite possibilities, because we serve a God of infinite possibilities. So as we begin, I actually want you to do something, and those of you who are online, you're going to have the same task. So I would like you to get your phones out right now. Everyone pull out your phones. And those of you online, I understand you have access to that same QR code. I'd like you to scan that code. And once you've scanned that code, you're going to find a question, and you can give up to 3 answers. And if you don't have your phone with you, the question is, who is your hero? And why don't you just lean over to the person beside you and let them know who your hero is? So we're thinking about our heroes, and I'll give you a couple of minutes to just answer it. Some of you are thinking. Sometimes the first and second are easy, but by that third time, that third entry, you're thinking, okay, who is my hero? Okay, looks like just about everyone is almost finished. And so all your answers are being submitted, and you'll see them up on the screen momentarily. Those of you at home, your answers are also included. So let's look at some of your heroes. Okay, Jesus, Mom, my mom, Mother Teresa, Mama. It's interesting how moms and dads are children's heroes. Moms and dads, please be encouraged, especially if you're raising teenagers. You still are their heroes, even if some days you don't feel that way. Daughter, Papa, Wayne Gretzky. Oh, we have some hockey fans. That's wonderful. Okay, so today, I'm actually going to talk to you about my hero, one of my heroes. But before I actually get into that, I'm going to give you kind of like a path of where we're going this morning. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is my hero. I'm going to tell you about one of my heroes. Then after that, I'll tell you my story. And then the third part of our time together this morning will be dedicated to you. What about you? Okay, so no more waiting. I'd like to introduce to you Gladys Aylward. She lived from 1902 to 1970. And I've looked at her life, and I would call her underdog to hero. Underdog, as you know, especially if you're talking about the sporting field, it's the team that's expected to lose. That's the underdog team. So if you look at Gladys Aylward's life, and you looked at her life as a young person in England, and you compared it to her life as an adult in China, you'd probably think, doesn't match up. because her life as a child, really much, she would have been described as the underdog. She was so very, very ordinary. She came from a working class family, so she had no connections, no access to people of power. It's a family who was just basically working hard to make ends meet. The other thing she had really going against her was that she struggled and struggled with learning. She was not scholarly at all, so she really struggled at school, difficult for her to learn, so eventually she just dropped out. And she went and got herself a job, and she worked as basically a housekeeper. She did that for some time. If you knew her at that time, if you're one of her peers, you wouldn't expect her to arise to do great things in her life. She would probably live an ordinary life, and that's perfectly okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But you wouldn't pin her as someone to do something great. But something significant happened to her in her early 20s. She met Jesus. And when she met Jesus, her life really did change. So first of all, she understood that Jesus was real. Secondly, she decided that she wanted to follow him, and she surrendered her life to him. Her life was so touched by God that she wanted others to experience the same thing she did. The great love that God had for her, that she finally came to realize she wanted others to know about it too. She came to learn that people in China had no access to learn about Jesus. And she thought to herself, they should at least have the opportunity to hear about him so that then they can make their decision of whether or not they want to follow him. So she said she wanted to go to China as a missionary and teach the people there about Jesus. So what does one do if one wants to be a missionary? You join a mission society, and so that's exactly what she did. A mission society would be a group of people who would support missionaries. They would take care of just about everything that the missionary needs. They would provide language study. They would provide medical supports, like making sure they have all their vaccines, all those practical things, helping them with their passports and their visas, all the practical stuff that they need. Probably finding accommodation in the place where they're going to go. But not only that, the society would also provide them support when they're out there on the field with emotional support, spiritual support, and just being an ear to listen to. So she signs up, all excited. She's getting ready to go. She gets accepted into the program, and then everything falls apart. Because, remember I told you about she was not very scholarly? She was not successful. She showed no aptitude to be able to learn the language. So the society asked her to leave. They said, really sorry, but we cannot support you going because you're just not equipped and you will not be successful there. From the perspective of the organization, you can understand why they would do this. How can you send someone out if they can't even learn the language? And you don't want to set them up for failure. So they are being very gracious and kind to her. But she's not going to take no for an answer. So she decides she's going to raise the money on her own and go by herself. Ladies and gentlemen, think about this. You've got someone who does not have the ability to learn the language, who's not going to be able to go on her own. But she decides she's going to go on her own. She has none of those supports that you normally have, but she's going to do it on her own. So she raises the money, takes her about a year, and she finally has enough money to purchase the cheapest ticket to get her from England to China. Most people would go by ship. That's reasonable. That was the safest mode of transportation. Not her. She can't afford that. So she takes the train, the Trans-Siberian train, which is going to take her across Europe and across Russia into China. Only problem is, at this time in history, Russia and China are under an undeclared war. Not safe. She doesn't know a word of Russian, but she's going. She gets on that train, the train stops, guards come in, everybody's out, she's questioned, doesn't know a word of what's going on, but she's questioned, her passport is taken, and she's waiting, and waiting, and waiting. And then some kind, gracious stranger comes and tells her what's really going on. See, when they took her passport, they doctored it. They took out her profession as missionary and they changed it to machinist. because at that particular time, Russia was desperate for work. And this stranger was explaining to her that she was going to be taken away, put up somewhere to start working, and never be heard from again. And so she had to leave now. So this stranger was able to take her out, put her on a ship, headed for Japan, and so she escaped safely. She gets to China, and things don't go very well. The people do not welcome her. They call her a foreign devil. Her host that she's with, they have conflict with each other. So you see, she's a very ordinary person, and she experiences some of the same hardships we experience. Sometimes we have conflict. Sometimes things don't go as we planned. But interestingly enough, she started to learn the language. She not only learned the language, she started to have honor in the presence of the people around her. They honored her. They respected her. And then she achieved some fantastic, wonderful things. Not only was she able to tell people about Jesus, she was instrumental in so many different things. So, for example, she was instrumental in bringing prison reform to that area of China. Prisoners were treated at subhuman levels, and there was nothing for them, nothing to reform them and help them to get back into society. So one day, a prison riot breaks out. Prison riot. People are fighting, furniture is throwing, people are killing each other. The guards are so afraid, they take off. The guards, with the weapons, take off. And the leaders of the area come up to her and says, "You go in there and stop this riot." So, you've got the guards here, a group of people, they're all armed, and they take off, and they send this little person in. She was like 4 feet 10 inches tall. "You go take care of that riot." So she does. She walks into the midst of all this fighting and all this killing, and she yells and she tells them to stop and sit down. And they do. They're all quiet, and they listen to her. And so they have this conversation back and forth, and they tell her what's really going on. And she realizes, yeah, they've got some really valid complaints. So she takes them to the powers that be. Prison reform starts because of Gladys Aylward. Another great thing that she did, that she was so instrumental in doing, is ending the cruel treatment of binding the feet of young girls. You see, at this time in history, it was very fashionable for women to be dainty. So they had to walk like this. So they would bind the feet of infant girls to the point, and they kept them bound throughout their childhood so the feet wouldn't grow. What would happen then is the feet would become deformed. So women in China at this time lived with a lot of pain because their feet were deformed, all kinds of pain. But in addition to that, they couldn't walk properly because their feet were not shaped as they should be, couldn't hold their weight. So China decided that they were going to ban this practice, and they needed someone to go to all the remote villages of China to ensure that this law was enforced. So who did they ask? They can't ask any of the Chinese women because all their feet are deformed and they can't walk. They asked Gladys Aylward. So she gets this entourage of people approved by the government, official government service. She gets to go to all the remote places of China and ensure that from that point on, the generations of women in China will be able to have good health and not be bound by this cruel treatment. But she also used that opportunity to go to all these remote places and tell them about Jesus and allow them the opportunity to make that decision for themselves. Now, probably the most important or the most famous thing that Aylward is famous for happened in 1938 when Japan invaded China. The enemy forces were getting closer and closer to where she was living. Now, by this time in China, she had taken in 100 children. She would take children that were orphans. She would take children that were abandoned and discarded, and she would bring them in and start caring for them. So when this war broke out, she literally had approximately 100 children under her care. Roads had now been closed because it was too dangerous to travel, and the enemy forces were too close, and she had to escape because they were coming, and she had to save the lives of these young children. And so she did. The only way to leave this area was through the mountain passages. And so she took 100 children with her across the mountain trails on a 12-day trek. Of those 100 children, there were some older teenage girls who had already been subjected to the feet binding, so they couldn't walk properly. She had little children who couldn't make the trek, so they had to be carried on back, like piggybacking. They ran out of food. They had to sleep in the open. All kinds of things happened. But 12 days later, Alward, with 100 children, were able to arrive in a place of safety. She was able to save the lives of those 100 children as she walked through this. And when they arrived there, she falls down and collapses. She had been wounded along the way by some type of a bullet, and she had typhoid fever. So she was delirious for 2 weeks. She did not even know that all the children had been billeted out and were safe in various families. Now, these are the most famous things she's done, but she's done many, many other things as well. So you see, she left such a legacy. She became such a hero. She became so instrumental in saving lives of people, in improving their life, and telling them about Jesus. That was the outflow of her life, the outflow of that relationship she had with Jesus, that she overcame every obstacle to be able to do this. God did for her impossible things. People did not believe she could do these things. She herself did not believe them. She writes in her book that when it was time to go into that prison, she was shaking in fear. But God did these great things for her. And when I think about her life, I really think about that scripture verse that was read to you earlier. Ephesians 3:20. Now all glory to God, who is able, through his mighty power at work within us, to accomplish infinitely more than we might ask or think. Alward's life really resonates with me because I can connect with that as well. And I can really connect with that verse. Because my story, I see the same thing in my story. I see God at work, infinitely doing more in my life than I had ever dreamed or expected. I'm standing here talking to you with a microphone in front of a group of people. But would you believe that there was a time in my life that I was so painfully shy that I did not speak until I reached grade 2. So kindergarten and grade 1, you couldn't get a word out of me. You might, if it was just one-on-one, and you might get a whisper out of me, but I would not talk. Even when the teacher was at the front of the class taking attendance, I would just stare at her and hope that she would read my mind, that I'm actually here, but the words were caught in my throat and I couldn't bring them out. That's how painfully shy I was. And as I grew up, I was one of those people that just was in the crowd from just obscure. So I would say that as Alward went from underdog to hero, I would say I went from obscurity to leader. And if you asked my high school teachers, oh, do you know this kid in your school? She's going to become a leader one day and she's going to have influence. Their response would be, who? That's how much I was just lost in the crowd. Like every year, I wanted to do something great. Oh, I'm going to make the honor roll this year. This semester, I'm going to get the honor roll. No, never worked for me. I mean, I got close, but never worked for me. And I'd look at that honor roll list and thinking, oh, those people are so smart. And then when it came to trying out for sports, oh, I wanted to join every sport. But I was mediocre at best at all of them. And yeah, I didn't make too many teams. But I wanted to. So I was just one of those kids who's just quiet, so compliant, never missed a deadline, never went to the principal's office. So yeah, I'm one of those kids who gets lost in the crowd. But God has done mighty things for me. So as I look at my life, I would like to break it out into three parts. First one is the foundation, second one is career 1, and the third one is career 2. What God has done to someone who lived in obscurity and brought them to leadership. If you told me when I was young that I'd be standing here before you talking and I would have done the things that I have done already, I wouldn't believe you. That's so ridiculous. You're not talking about me. But God is a God of infinite possibilities, and he does infinite and great things for us. He has greater things for us than we could ever imagine or think. So starting with my foundation, yes, I do believe that Jesus is Lord of all. And I met him when I was quite young, and I decided that the love that he showed me was so great that I wanted to give my life to him. So I have surrendered my life. And God gave me a great passion for justice and for those who are on the outskirts of society. Those who just don't make it. Those who are beaten down and are oppressed. And out of that foundation flowed my life and flowed things that happened in my life. So my first career was that of an educator. I first went into teaching. When I first went to university, I actually didn't want to become a teacher. No, anything else but a teacher. You know why? Because at that time in my university, people would say, oh, if you can't do anything else, you teach. But when I went to university, I realized that that's not true, actually. There are a lot of people who know a lot of things, and they can't teach. Teaching takes a great skill, and I learned through university that God had gifted me with that skill. So I became a teacher. And when I taught, I realized, it didn't take too long to realize, that in every school I went to, I always gravitated to the most at-risk students in the building. So eventually, I got all my qualifications to be a special education specialist, and that's what I did for many years. In fact, I so specialized in this area that I was the one who started the autism program at the secondary level for the Toronto District School Board. And you say, wow, that's something great. No, that was God who did it, because I walked in and I had no idea that I was going to do anything like that. But little by little, God did that through me. And working with the at-risk students, I got to know their families, got to work with them, got to know their stories, got to pray for them, and got to see how God was moving. And that was really, really encouraging. And as years went by, a lot of people kept telling me, you know, you should be an administrator. You should be an administrator. And I kept saying, no, thank you, not me. I don't want to do that. I can't do that. But eventually, I figured it out that yes, that is the path I should take. So I took all the courses I needed to take. I went through the all-consuming process. I was successful. I got on what's called the principals list, and I was promoted to become a vice principal. Wow, that's great. And then I showed up at my first school. Oh my goodness, was I in for a surprise. First day of school, I walk in, car in the parking lot with 4 slashed tires. Eee, this does not look very good. Okay, walk into the building, chaos. I said, this does not look very good. A fight breaks out. First day of school, a fight breaks out. Oh my goodness, what have I gotten myself into? I ended up in one of the most difficult schools in all of Toronto. It was so extremely difficult and dangerous. At times there was times that our staff really had to protect each other. There was a time when the principal kind of almost pushed me into my office and closed the door and said, don't come out, because there was a parent running down the hallway to get me because I suspended her student for doing something. It was not an easy school. There was a time when student council was having something special for the students, and they wanted to have like a pie eating contest. So, you know, you have those silver pie plates, and fill them up with whipped cream. It sounds so wonderful because these kids really wanted to do something for their peers, and it was going to happen at lunchtime in the cafeteria, and lunchtime begins. I go downstairs to check on things, and the first thing I noticed, there are no staff supervisors. I said, oh, this does not look good. And within seconds, a fight breaks out. And not just a fight. This is an all-and-out brawl. Furniture is being thrown around. And this whipped cream is being thrown around, and people are jumping over tables, and I'm the only adult in there, and I'm screaming, and I go right into it. I'm covered in whipped cream. And then, right before me, 2 people are standing this close to each other, and they're eyeing each other, and I know a fight is going to break out. And this is when it's really good to be small like me. I just squeezed in between the 2 of them, and I just locked eyes with the girl, and I started talking to her. Started de-escalating, trying to move her away, slowly moving closer and closer, so she had to back away. So by God's grace, that fight was averted. And I won't get into what the outcome of that is, but this is the sort of thing I dealt with. This is the person who wouldn't speak. This is the person who was so obscure in the middle of everything. But this is the person that God gave a heart and a compassion for those who are on the outskirts of society. And he brought me through all this. And then I realized this is my mission field. Just like when a missionary goes to a far-off country, they have to learn the language, they have to learn a new culture. And I had to learn a new language, and I had to learn a new culture. I could not expect to go into this school with a middle-class value system, middle-class vocabulary, representing an institution that they did not trust and expect to be a blessing. And expect to do something. Wasn't going to work that way. So my students became my teachers, and I learned from them, and I spent time with them. And eventually what happened, relationships started to build. I remember standing, oh, I love this. think when you become a vice principal or a principal or any position of power, it can go to your head so quickly. When you hold that master key and walkie-talkie and you walk down the hallway, people scatter. All I have to do is show up, and students are in the corner, they all go back to their classrooms. And I said, oh, this is great. I didn't even have to say anything. But you do carry some power as a vice principal. And now I lost my train of thought. Yes, so I'm out in the hallways doing my rounds, and one of the things I used to do a lot of as I walked the school, and I walked it every day, is pray for the school. Pray for the teachers, pray for the students. And I walked through the school and did that. And one day I'm doing my hall duty, and a girl comes up to me. She stuffs a piece of paper in my hand. Come with me to the office. I want to talk to you. And I thought, oh, she's telling me this? Shouldn't it be the other way around? I followed her into the office, into my office. She sits down. I go around, and I looked at that piece of paper. And it was a piece of paper giving her instructions of what court she had to show up because she was arrested. She did something wrong. And yeah, I could have judged her. I could have said, why did you make that stupid decision? But in speaking to her, I realized she had been taken advantage of. You see, she was a minor. So an adult talks her into this, drives her there, she goes in and does it, and what happens if she gets caught? Oh, she's under 18. The penalties won't be as great as they are for me because I'm over 18. So someone sets her up to do this, and then when she does get caught, what does that person do? Takes off with her school knapsack in the car. So now she has no schoolwork to do. But I sat there and I listened to her from her perspective and was able to be with her. Another time, a parent comes into my classroom, sorry, not my classroom, my office, and she's beside herself in tears. Her son has just been arrested and found guilty and sentenced to some time in prison. She's worried for her son. She's worried whether or not he will be beaten up or what's going to happen to him in prison. She's worried whether or not he will come out worse than when he went in. She's worried about all these things, and she has no one to talk to. And when she begins to cry, and I can feel her pain, throw it all protocol. I'm not even a hugger, but I hugged her, and I told her I'd pray for her. So God gave me many, many, many opportunities as a vice principal to affect not only my classroom, which I could do as a teacher, but an entire school, and affect student culture. And as I was going merrily along, some people started to tell me, you need to be a principal. Get into the process. And I kind of resisted for quite a while, and finally I realized that that was my next step. I was going to go to become a principal, and I already started the process. But something happened. I think it happened in the middle of the night. I just woke up and this strange thought came to me to just leave my workplace and go into something new that God had for me. And I thought, that's strange. Didn't think much of it. But over time, this kept happening again and again and again and again and again. So I started discerning. This was a big decision to make. What am I going to do and leave my profession? For one thing, the salary was nice. I kind of liked that. The security was great. I liked that as well. I liked my job. What about the pension? Like, if I leave now, what happens to that? There are so many things. And after this very long discerning process, it took a couple of years, I realized the only thing keeping me back was fear. Fear of the unknown. Fear of giving everything that I know and moving into something that I don't know. And when I realized that, I realized, no, I need to step out into this. I'm not sure what God has for me, but I need to step out. So I did know that I needed to go back to school. So this is what happened. I've been discerning this for a long time, but I didn't tell anybody at school. So get the picture of what my colleagues must have thought of. It's the second week of June. We have 2 weeks left of school, and I hand in a resignation. And so I did that in June. In July, I applied to university, seminary. In August, I was accepted. In September, I was sitting in class. So I got a master's of theological studies, and then after that, I went through an ordination process. So I asked God, what now, Lord? And I started to look for, what am I going to do with my life with this degree and this ordination? And God directed my steps to start working at Unionville Alliance Church. And so that's where I am right now. And this is what I've learned. That the passion that God gave me way back then, that flowed through my life as an educator, and that is now still with me, All those experiences God brought to prepare me for this step. Because now I can do all the things I've done before. I'm still working and very passionate about justice. But I don't have to worry about all the policies and procedures and all the things that education got in the way of really being face-to-face and hands-on with those who really need the help. In this role, I can do it with all of that. But in this role, I also have the freedom to talk about Jesus. When I tell people I'm a reverend, I get a few responses. One, what's that? Two, oh, that's nice. And the third response is they immediately start talking to me about their spiritual needs. So just with that position, it's more open for people to be willing to accept me to talk about Jesus, but also ask him questions. So that's what God has done for me. God moved through Gladys Aylward to move her from an underdog to a hero. And God took me out of obscurity into leadership and places of influence. Well, what about you? We've come to the last part of the message. What about you? What's your foundation? What are some of the obstacles in your life that you say, oh, I can't do that? I could never do that. Remember, we serve a God of infinite possibilities. God can do it. But sometimes we have our obstacles that we put in the way. Sometimes we're not surrendering. To the extent we surrender to God is to the same extent he can use us. If we're not surrendering, he won't be using us because he won't force us. But as we surrender every part of our lives, the possibilities are infinite with what he can do with us and how he can use us to impact this world for good. So I'd like you to imagine those possibilities and just take some time this afternoon with God. What are some of the things that you think could never happen because you can't do them? Surrender them to God, and you'll be amazed because he has greater plans. He will accomplish it infinitely more than you could ever think or imagine. Thank you so much for listening.